My parents publicly shamed me and my child at a wedding. They didn't expect the fallout. I ended up leaving my parents' house with my child the same night as that wedding. It happened less than 4 hours after the ceremony started. These were my parents. There were about 180 guests in the room. And somehow my child became the example they chose to use. At least that's how it felt to me at the time. I kept wondering if I was misunderstanding something, because when I replayed it later the numbers didn't line up, and I still don't know when it crossed the line. I'll explain how it got there. The wedding was for my cousin, my mother's sister's daughter. We're not extremely close, but close enough that it was normal for us to be there. I hadn't planned to attend at first. My child was tired, school had been heavy that week, and honestly I felt uneasy. Something about the invitation felt formal in a way that didn't include us. But my parents insisted. They said it would look bad if I didn't come. They said family notices these things. We arrived just before the reception started. The hall was already full. Round tables, white covers, the usual setup. My parents were seated near the front, close to the bride's family. They waved us over but didn't stand up. That should have been nothing. Still, I noticed it. My child stayed close to me. They always do in crowded places. I remember adjusting their sleeve and telling them it was going to be fine. I didn't know why I said that. Nothing had happened yet. Dinner went smoothly. People laughed, took photos, moved between tables. My parents spoke to almost everyone except us. When they did talk to me, it was short. Just practical comments. Sit here, move there, don't block the aisle. Then came the speeches. I wasn't expecting anything unusual. Usually it's the parents, maybe a sibling, someone emotional but harmless. My father stood up with a microphone. That surprised me. He wasn't listed on the program, but people clapped anyway. He started by congratulating the couple. He spoke about family values, responsibility, tradition. The words were general at first. Then he shifted. He talked about how weddings remind us of the choices we make, how children learn by watching adults, how public behavior reflects private decisions. I remember thinking it was oddly vague. Then he looked directly at our table. Not long. Just long enough. He said something about how some parents allow excuses, how discipline matters, how embarrassment can be a lesson. People laughed softly, like they weren't sure they were supposed to. I felt my chest tighten. My child leaned toward me and whispered if they were in trouble. I told them no. Even then I wasn't fully sure. My mother followed him. She didn't take the microphone, but she stood beside him. She added that family should correct family. That love means being honest, even in public. She smiled while saying it. I sat there trying to understand if this was meant for someone else. There were other children there, louder ones, running ones. Mine hadn't left their chair. That's when I noticed people turning. Not everyone. Enough. I felt heat in my face, not anger, more like confusion mixed with shame. I kept replaying the last 10 minutes in my head. Nothing added up. My father ended his speech by saying he hoped people would reflect. Then he raised his glass. Applause followed, uneven but real. The room moved on. Music started again. People went back to talking. But my child didn't. They sat very still. I asked if they were okay. They nodded, but their eyes stayed on the tablecloth. I realized then that whatever that was, it had landed. I didn't confront my parents. Not then. I didn't know how. I didn't even know what I would accuse them of. I just knew something had shifted. I stayed seated longer than I should have. That part still bothers me. I kept telling myself not to react, that it might make things worse if I stood up or said something. So I waited for it to pass. My parents didn't come over right away. They stayed near the front table, laughing with relatives. My mother glanced back once. Our eyes met. She looked away quickly. I tried to act normal for my child. I asked if they wanted dessert. They shook their head. They were usually excited about cake. That should have told me everything. After a few minutes, my aunt came by. She said the speech was heartfelt. She said my father always spoke his mind. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. My child asked if we could go to the restroom. I took them. Inside, they washed their hands even though they didn't need to. They kept the water running. I told them we could leave soon if they wanted. That's when they asked why everyone was looking at them. I told them people weren't, that it just felt that way sometimes. As soon as I said it, I knew it wasn't fully true. Enough people had looked, enough to matter. When we came back, my parents were finally at our table. My father asked why we disappeared. His tone was light, almost casual. I said my child needed a break. He nodded and said kids these days were sensitive. My mother added that life doesn't adjust for feelings. She said it like advice. I asked what the speech was about. I tried to keep my voice calm. My father said it wasn't about us specifically. He said if the shoe fits, people notice. Then he laughed. I remember looking at my child. They were staring at their hands again. That laugh landed harder than the speech. I told my parents it wasn't appropriate, not the place. not the time. My mother said weddings are about family values. She said embarrassment builds character. I didn't respond right away. I was counting. I do that when I feel cornered. Counting keeps me from saying the wrong thing. I said we were leaving. My father looked surprised. He asked why I was being dramatic. People were still eating. Music was playing. I stood up anyway. I took my child's hand. They gripped it tighter than usual. As we walked out, I heard someone say my name. I didn't turn around. I wasn't sure I could. Outside, the air felt colder, quieter. My child asked if they had ruined the wedding. I told them no. I told them none of it was their fault. I wasn't sure my parents believed that. We sat in the car for a few minutes before starting the engine. I needed a moment. My child stared out the window, silent. I kept replaying the room in my head, the faces, the timing. On the drive home, they finally spoke. They asked if they should apologize to their grandparents. That question stayed with me longer than anything else that night. I asked what they thought they did wrong. They said maybe they embarrassed the family by being quiet, by not smiling enough. I didn't answer right away. I was trying to figure out how a child comes to that conclusion. It wasn't something they invented on their own. It had been taught, slowly, over time. When we got home, they went straight to their room. No meltdown, no tears. That almost made it worse. I checked on them a little later and they were already asleep. My phone buzzed around midnight. A message from my mother. She said I overreacted. She said public lessons are sometimes necessary. She added that family shouldn't be so fragile. I typed a response, then deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. The next morning, my father called. He asked if we made it home safely. I said yes. There was a pause. He said I shouldn't have left like that. People noticed that word again. I asked if he noticed my child. He said kids forget things quickly. He said I was projecting. After the call, I sat at the kitchen table longer than usual. I kept thinking about the speech, the timing, the eye contact, the certainty in their voices. Started listing moments from the past, small comments, jokes that landed wrong, advice given loudly instead of privately. It added up faster than I expected. Later that day, my child asked if they had to see their grandparents again soon. I said not right now. I said we'd talk about it later. They nodded and went back to their homework. That was the moment I realized something had shifted permanently, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. I didn't make any big decisions that week. I didn't announce boundaries or demand apologies. I just stopped filling the space. When my parents invited us over the following weekend, I said we were busy. When they asked about school events, I kept answers short. Not cold, just careful. I watched my child more closely. I listened to how they talked about themselves. I corrected things gently when they blamed themselves for situations they didn't control. The wedding didn't ruin anything. It clarified it. I saw how easily correction became humiliation, how quickly love turned conditional, and how fast a child absorbs what adults say without realizing it. A few days after the wedding, things went back to looking normal on the surface. School runs, meals, homework at the table. But the tone was different, quieter. My parents didn't bring the wedding up again right away. That was almost harder. It felt like they were waiting for me to smooth it over, like I usually did. I caught myself rehearsing conversations in my head. What I would say if they apologized, what I would say if they didn't. Most of the time I said nothing at all. My child started asking more questions that week, not directly about the wedding, about rules, about expectations, about what people think is polite. One evening they asked why some people correct others in front of everyone. I asked where that question came from. They shrugged and said they just noticed it happens. I said sometimes adults confuse being right with being loud. I said correction doesn't have to be public to be real. I wasn't sure if I believed that fully yet, but I wanted them to hear it. My mother called midweek. She asked if we were free Sunday. Her voice was cheerful, like nothing had happened. I said I wasn't sure. She said she missed her grandchild. She said it with just enough emphasis to make it feel pointed. I told her I needed some space after the wedding. There was a pause. Then she said space creates distance. She asked if that's what I wanted. I didn't answer immediately. I was weighing words. I said I wanted respect, especially for my child. She laughed softly, not amused, more dismissive. She said respect is earned, even by children. That's when something hardened in me, not anger, clarity. I said we wouldn't be coming Sunday. She said I was being sensitive again. She reminded me how much they had done for me growing up. I let her finish. After the call I felt tired, not emotional, just worn down. My child asked who I was talking to. I said their grandmother. They asked if she was upset. I told them adults can be upset and still be wrong. I didn't plan that sentence. It came out on its own. That night I thought about how often I had absorbed comments like that growing up. How normal it felt to minimize discomfort. How automatic it was to smooth things over for the sake of peace. I realized I didn't want my child learning that skill the same way. The next time my father texted, it was short. He said we needed to talk. He said family issues shouldn't linger. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I replied that we could talk later. Not now. I didn't know what later meant yet. I just knew now wasn't safe. When later finally came, it wasn't planned. It never is. My father showed up at my place the following week. No warning. Middle of the afternoon. My child was doing homework at the kitchen table. I opened the door and he smiled. Led like this was a normal visit. He asked if he could come in. I said yes, mostly out of habit. He sat down and looked around like he was checking for changes. Then he said we needed to clear the air. He said holding on to things creates resentment. I asked him what he thought needed clearing. He said the wedding reaction. He said people were confused. He said it made the family look divided. I asked again what he thought happened at the wedding. He said he gave a general speech. He said I chose to take it personally. He said that was on me. My child stayed quiet, too quiet. I noticed them watching his face instead of doing their work. That familiar stillness came back. I told my father this wasn't a conversation to have in front of my child. He said that was exactly the problem. He said I was sheltering them too much. I felt my jaw tighten. I asked him to lower his voice. He said he wasn't yelling. He said I was sensitive, that word again. I asked him to leave, not dramatically. Just plainly. He looked genuinely shocked. He asked if I was serious. I said yes. He stood up slowly. He said I was overcorrecting. He said one day I'd regret pushing family away. Before he left, he turned to my child and said they shouldn't feel responsible for adult disagreements. It almost sounded kind. Almost. After he left, my child asked if they caused the argument. I said no. I said none of this was because of them. They nodded, but I could tell they were still trying to make sense of it. Children always do. That night, I wrote down what had happened, not to send to anyone, just to get it straight in my own head. Dates, words, pauses. I realized how often conversations with my parents followed the same pattern. Dismiss, reframe, minimize, move on. The next few weeks were quieter, no surprise visits, fewer messages. When they did reach out, it was polite, careful. I didn't feel relieved. I felt alert. My child slowly returned to themselves, laughing more, asking fewer permission-based questions. Still cautious but lighter. One evening they said they liked it better when things were calm. I said me too. That was when I understood this wasn't about one wedding. It never had been. It was about what behavior gets normalized, and what gets named. The silence didn't last forever. It just changed shape. My mother started sending messages that sounded neutral but weren't. She asked if my child was well. She asked if school was going fine. Each question carried a pause behind it, like she was waiting for an invitation back in. I replied politely, short answers, no details. I could feel myself editing every word. A month after the wedding, there was another family event. A birthday dinner for my uncle. I wasn't invited directly. The message came through a cousin. I said we wouldn't be attending. I didn't explain. I didn't apologize. That night my mother called again. She said people were asking questions. She said absence sends a message. She asked if I was trying to punish them. I said no. I said I was protecting my child. There was a long pause. Then she said I was rewriting history. I didn't argue. I just said this is how it feels now. That was new for me. Stating something without defending it. She said feelings change. She said family is permanent. I said boundaries can be too. After the call, I sat on the couch longer than usual. I thought about how often I had confused access with love. How often I had tolerated discomfort to keep peace. My child came in and sat next to me. They asked if the birthday dinner would be fun. I said probably. They asked if it was okay that we weren't going. I said yes. I said not every invitation has to be accepted. They seemed relieved by that. A few days later, my father sent a message. He said he hoped this phase would pass. He said families survive worse. I didn't reply. That felt heavy at first. Not replying. Like leaving a door closed on purpose. But over time it felt clearer. Less noise. I noticed my child stopped asking if they were being good. They just did things. They laughed louder. They took up space again. I didn't celebrate that out loud. I just noticed it. One evening, while cleaning up dinner, my child said something small. They said they liked that no one talked about them at school events. They said it made them feel normal. I nodded. I knew exactly what they meant. That was when I understood the cost of staying silent, and the cost of speaking up. Both exist. You just choose which one you're willing to pay. By the time the next holiday came around, the tension had settled into something predictable. Not gone, just familiar. My parents sent a group message about dinner plans. Same place as always, same time. No mention of what had happened before. I stared at the message longer than I should have. I noticed how my body reacted before my thoughts did. Tight shoulders, slow breath. My child saw my phone light up and asked who it was. I said their grandparents. They asked if we were going. I said I didn't know yet. That was honest. A few hours later, my mother followed up privately. She said she hoped we wouldn't make things awkward again. She added a smiling emoji. That almost made it worse. I replied that we wouldn't be attending. I said we already had plans, which wasn't true, but it wasn't a lie either. The plan was peace. She didn't respond. That silence carried through the holidays. No gifts dropped off. No surprise calls. Relatives asked gentle questions and accepted vague answers. My child noticed the difference. They asked why things felt quieter. I said sometimes quiet means people are adjusting. They seemed okay with that. A few weeks later, there was a school event, an open house, parents everywhere, kids showing projects. My child walked confidently from display to display. They didn't check my face for approval. They didn't hover. That caught me off guard. A teacher stopped me and said my child seemed more relaxed lately. She said they participated more in class discussions. She asked if anything had changed at home. I said we'd simplified some things. She nodded like she understood. Driving home, my child talked non-stop about a project they were proud of. They didn't lower their voice. They didn't ask if they were talking too much. I realized how much effort it takes for a child to shrink, and how visible it is when they stop. Later that night, my father finally called again. His tone was different, less certain. He asked how we were doing. I said we were fine. He asked if this distance was permanent. I said I didn't know. I said trust takes time to rebuild once it's shaken. He said intentions matter. I said impact does too. He didn't argue. That surprised me. Before hanging up, he said he missed his grandchild. I said I understood, and I meant it, but I didn't offer anything else. After the call, I sat alone for a while. I thought about how boundaries don't feel powerful when you set them. They feel lonely, but they also feel honest. I didn't know what the future would look like with my parents. I still don't. I just knew what it couldn't look like anymore. The weeks after that call were uneven. Some days felt settled. Other days felt like I was waiting for something to drop. My parents didn't push right away. That was new. It made me suspicious and relieved at the same time. My child kept moving forward. School projects, friends coming over, normal complaints about homework and early mornings. Nothing dramatic. I noticed how rarely they mentioned their grandparents now. Not avoiding the topic, just not centering it. One afternoon, my mother sent a message asking if she could drop off a gift she had bought earlier. She said it was already wrapped. She said she didn't want it to go tea. A waste. I stared at the message. I thought about how gifts had always worked in our family, how they softened things without addressing them. I replied that I appreciated the thought, but now wasn't a good time. I said we could revisit it later. That was true. Just not immediately. She didn't respond for 2 days. Then she sent a short message. She said she felt shut out. She said she was trying. I believed that she thought she was trying. That didn't mean it was enough. I replied that I wasn't asking for effort. I was asking for change. I didn't add anything else. That night, my child asked if their grandparents were mad at them. The question came out of nowhere. We were brushing teeth. I told them no. I told them adults manage their own feelings. I said kids are not responsible for keeping adults comfortable. They nodded. Then they asked if that was always true. I said yes, every time. A few days later, my father sent a longer message. He said he had been thinking. He said maybe the wedding speech wasn't the right moment. He didn't call it wrong. Just not ideal. I read it twice. I noticed what wasn't there. I replied that timing wasn't the issue. Public correction was, using my child as an example was. He said that wasn't his intention. I said intention doesn't undo harm. I didn't soften it. There was another pause after that. Longer. During that time, I felt something unexpected. Grief. Not for what was happening, for what never had. I grieved the idea of parents who reflected instead of defended. Grandparents who protected, instead of instructed. I hadn't realized how much I was still hoping for that version. Letting go of it felt heavy. But also clarifying. One evening, my child asked if people can change when they really wanna. I said some can, some don't know how, and some don't see a reason to. They thought about that for a moment. Then they said they hoped people tried anyway. So did I. But hope stopped being the plan. The last shift didn't announce itself. It came quietly, almost politely. My parents eventually stopped messaging as often, not out of resolution, out of adjustment. They learned what topics got responses and which ones didn't. I noticed how much energy that freed up, not responding, not explaining, just living. Months passed. Birthdays came and went. Cards arrived in the mail, signed, brief, careful. I didn't throw them away. I didn't make a show of keeping them either. They went into a drawer. My child grew taller during that time. Literally. But also in posture. They stopped shrinking when adults entered rooms. They spoke when they had something to say. One afternoon, while watching them talk confidently to a neighbor, I felt something settle in my chest. Not pride. Relief. Later that week, my mother asked if we could meet, just coffee, just the two of us. I said yes. Not because I was ready, because I was steady. She talked a lot. About missing us. About how families change. About how she never meant to hurt anyone. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, I said I believed she didn't intend harm. I said intention didn't erase impact. I said my child's dignity wasn't negotiable. She nodded. She didn't argue. She didn't agree either. That was enough information. We left politely. No hug, no scene. On the drive home, my child asked how it went. I said it was fine. They asked if things were fixed. I said no. I said things were clear. They thought about that. Then they said clear sounded better than fixed. I agreed. Nothing dramatic followed. No big apology. No final break. Just a quieter relationship with firmer edges. I stopped waiting for my parents to become different people. I started protecting the person my child was becoming. Sometimes I still think about the wedding, about that room, that microphone, those eyes turning. But it doesn't sting the same way anymore. Now it just reminds me how quickly a moment can teach you who someone is, and how slowly you learn to trust yourself afterward. That's where this story ends, not with closure, with boundaries, and honestly, that's enough for us.